Good morning and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Tuesday morning. We're going to get started with some local news for you. Severe thunderstorms broke high temperatures in Pennsylvania yesterday and left behind power outages and mass transit issues in parts of the state. Fox 29's Lauren Johnson filed this report.
You can see just over my shoulder neighbors waking up to assess and survey the damage that they are seeing that's leaving them in the dark. Apparently, this huge tree fell in two phases. The trouble started yesterday evening when that bad weather rolled right through our area. It was around 5:30 p.m. and the first part of this massive tree snapped off. That piece you see there, Greg showing you, fell right on top of the woman who lives in this house. Her sister's car, it was parked right in front. She said the borough came out yesterday, helped her get the branches cut and get the driveway cleared. And then several hours later, listen to what Rodina Lloyd says happened next.
We saw the wind swirling, it looked like a monsoon was outside. And I went out and I'm like, all right, let's check the van, let's check her car. And I'm like, let's move it. And I was like, oh, damage has already been done, because we saw the tree, we saw a little branch over here fall. Then we saw this side. My husband saw it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. All we heard is a big kaboom. And I'm like, this is, so I'm like, oh gosh, did it hit the house? I'm like, Lord, make sure it doesn't hit the neighbors.
And it didn't, but you can see right where it landed, pulling down those power lines. So now everyone in this neighborhood has to wait for Pico crews to make it over here to lift this limb off that power line and reconnect them. They've been without power for about 7 hours now. Not really fun, but Rodina says she's happy that it happened after that heat wave. Can you imagine sitting inside that house with no power right now? She's also grateful that it happened the way it did, and making sure no one was really seriously injured after this happened. So not really convenient for people that are waking up, and a lot of people apparently use this road here, you hear the horns, as a cut through, and so they're not able to cut through. It's causing some creation of some troubles with traffic in this area, but thankfully no one injured.
And in Burlington County, there may still be some dark intersections in Mount Laurel due to downed trees landing on power lines. The damage was surprising to some people who live in the area, who say they didn't notice until the power went out last night. You may be waking up to lots of PSE&G workers around Burlington County working hard to get that power restored. And these latest rounds of storms have lots of people waking up without power this morning. PECO is reporting almost 30,000 customers out. AC Electric says about 2,800. PSE&G says more than 51,000 people are without lights, and in Delaware, more than 4,000. And in local news, a blast caught on video after someone set off an explosive device inside a West Philadelphia restaurant. This surveillance video is from New Asia Restaurant on Lancaster Avenue. It happened around 1:20 Monday morning. Someone detonated what police described as a M500 or M1000 improvised explosive device. The explosion blowing out a hole in the front wall and front door of the business and blasting menu signs off the wall. Customers and workers inside went running for their lives.
I just hear boom, and my ears cannot hear anything. I'm just going to the back. Everybody is out.
They ran?
Yeah.
A 19-year-old customer was taken to the hospital for an arm injury. Thankfully, he is in stable condition. Now, police are looking for the person who did the crime. This is the same device that injured several young people over the last few weeks, including a 9-year-old girl and 15-year-old boy around the 4th of July. And we have new details on a story we first told you about yesterday morning. A 17-year-old was shot by police after he crashed a stolen school bus on the Walt Whitman Bridge and then approached officers armed with a knife. The investigation created a traffic nightmare for drivers Monday morning. Police in West Deptford, New Jersey say they spotted the stolen bus driving erratically late Sunday night. The bus pulled over, then sped off when an officer tried approaching it. Police stopped their chase. Delaware River Port Authority officers say they found the bus after it crashed on the Walt Whitman Bridge. A masked driver allegedly got out and started walking toward them, carrying a knife.
They yelled for him to stop. At some point, he turned around, walked toward them, brandishing a knife. They continued to issue commands for him to stop. They began to back up. He charged the officers, at which time they discharged their weapons.
Investigators say 2 officers on scene fired, striking the 17-year-old. He was taken to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and is expected to survive. And in Newcastle County, investigators have not yet released a motive for a murder-suicide that happened at a Wilmington nursing home. Delaware State Police say 82-year-old Louis Camerata shot his 79-year-old wife, Gail, then turned the gun on himself. It happened on Saturday at the Manor Care Living Facility on the 700 block of Folk Road. No one else was injured in the incident. And in Lehigh County, a terrifying moment for a 6-year-old boy who was riding his bike outside when he was nearly struck by lightning. Juniel Velez was outside his home in Bethlehem, PA, when storms rolled in Sunday night. His neighbor was urging him and his friends to get off their bikes and get inside, but they weren't quick enough. The lightning struck the ground just inches away from the boy, who fell off his bike, injuring his mouth so badly he had to get stitches.
Ambulance came.
Were you crying?
And it was a mess, blood everywhere, but I'm glad he's fine.
The 6-year-old is doing just fine now. He is playing outside again and ironically still wearing his favorite pajamas, which feature lightning bolts on the side. And in political news this morning, FBI Director Christopher Wray's appearance before a Senate committee could be something of a preview of the intense questioning Special Counsel Robert Mueller is likely to face in Congress on Wednesday. Fox's Doug Luzader has the story this morning from Washington.
Tomorrow is the day, Robert Mueller's big appearance on Capitol Hill.
And the former special counsel in the Russia probe now has new marching orders from the Department of Justice. So Doug Luzader has the story from Washington. We're learning more and more before the hearing tomorrow.
Yes, we are. Good morning. And the Department of Justice wants to make sure that more or less Robert Mueller sticks to the script.
By all indications, former special counsel Robert Mueller is no longer an employee of the Justice Department. But as he gets ready to head to Capitol Hill tomorrow for his highly anticipated testimony on the Russia probe, the DOJ wants to preemptively rein him in, sending him this letter. Any testimony must remain within the boundaries of your public report.
The report is my testimony.
Mueller has said as much himself, that if called before Congress, he would simply reiterate what was in his lengthy report.
No, I'm not going to be watching. Probably. Maybe I'll see a little bit of it.
President Trump says he's not too interested in watching, but plenty of others will watch. And many Democrats hope Mueller makes their case for impeachment. And while Republicans want to talk about how the investigation began, we may see a preview today as FBI Director Christopher Wray testifies before a Senate committee. As for the president, tomorrow's Mueller appearance may be tough to ignore.
Despite saying he's not going to watch, his schedule Wednesday is relatively clear for most of the day until he heads to West Virginia that evening for a fundraiser. So I think we'll all be watching his Twitter account to see what he thinks.
And look, a lot of people are going to be watching this. This is the first time that Robert Mueller will have spoken publicly since he made comments about the report back in May, and this whole thing begins in a little over 25 hours.
A little over 25 hours, big deal. Judiciary Democrats holding mock hearings today as well, trying to get everything right, crossing all the T's, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And of course, we want to mention that we will be showing the hearing right here on Fox 29, and it starts at 8:30.
And in consumer news this morning, Macy's is pulling a line of plates from their stores after Twitter users criticized the design for promoting, quote, fat shaming and unhealthy eating practices. Fox Business's Tracy Carrasco has more.
A big hit for the vitamin supplement store GNC.
Yeah, the company is closing hundreds of its stores, blaming a decline in mall traffic. So I guess this also has to do with online activity, right? Tracy, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, GNC is saying that they're going to close as many as 900 stores by the end of 2020. Most of these will be in malls. Mall locations make up about 28% of GNC locations. As you said, malls have seen declining foot traffic. Unfortunately, this translates to a lot of these stores not seeing as many shoppers in the stores as well. No real sign of rebounding. So the thing that a lot of these retailers are doing, they're just waiting for their leases to run out and then just shutting down the store. So GNC, unfortunately, joining that long list of other retailers like Gymboree, Payless, who have all announced store closings this year. They're going to focus more on their partnerships with Dick's Sporting Goods and also Hudson News.
It almost feels like soon, what's going to be left in malls? Everybody seems to be closing up shop here.
Are we going to have malls?
Yeah.
You see a lot of those gates down.
Yeah, there goes another one. Let's talk about Macy's. Yep. They have a little controversy with some plates that they were selling.
Yes, these are some dinner plates that have been sold at a lot of those pop-up stores within Macy's, those story pop-up stores. These plates, they have images of kind of portion control circles on the plates, and with those circles, they have corresponding names like skinny jeans, mom jeans, favorite jeans. So depending on, obviously, the skinny jeans, that's going to be a very small portion. These plates are sparking some controversy on social media, online. A lot of people saying that they're promoting an image of body shaming. Others saying, no, they're just lighthearted. They were first brought up by Allie Ward, a science correspondent with the CBS series Innovation Nation. She tweeted out a picture of these plates saying, how do we get these banned from all the stores? That quickly took off. Macy's even now responding, saying, okay, we're removing them. These have missed the mark. Even though the company who makes them, they're called Portions, they say they're just supposed to be lighthearted, and they didn't want anyone to feel badly about themselves by using these plates, that they were just supposed to be a fun way to keep track of your portions.
Yeah, kind of novelty plates. And wasn't that the whole idea of the pop-up shops in Macy's? You kind of find the
quirky, like fun
items.
things.
Exactly.
And
these little gifts like that.
Well, seems like not everyone's taking it lightly. Okay, thank you, Tracy.
I would actually use that plate, though.
Would
kind of like the boundaries of especially if you go to a buffet. Yeah, I kind of would. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm piling on the mac and cheese a little too much.
For me, it doesn't matter what you put on the plate. I'm going to eat it. It doesn't matter what it says, how it's decorated. I'm still eating. I love to eat.
That's why you need portion control plates.
That's why I need the gym. That's really what it's thinking that I need to go
story.
back.
And moving on to your Fox 29 Weather Authority. The Philadelphia area is slated for a much cooler Tuesday in the wake of this weekend's oppressive heat. A steady rain is expected this morning, with showers continuing through this afternoon and evening. Tuesday will reach a high of around 75 degrees, just a mild 20 degrees cooler than what we've experienced these last few days. Though temperatures will rise by Wednesday with a high of 84 degrees. The region is expected to dry out during the latter half of this week with mostly sunny conditions for the remainder of the week. And here we have a look at current temperatures in our area. A mild 63 degrees up in the Poconos and a much more bearable 72 degrees over in Lancaster, at 71 right here in Philadelphia, and just a degree higher down the shore in Wildwood, New Jersey. And looking ahead to your 7-day forecast, again, the showers are sticking around today with a high of around 75, 76 degrees. But going into Wednesday, we are back to seasonable temps and conditions. Nice sunny weather with a high of 83 degrees, mirrored almost exactly on Thursday. And that nice weather continues into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when the Phillies return to Citizens Bank. And don't forget to download the latest version of the Fox 29 Weather Authority app to have the latest forecast right at your fingertips. And on Good Day Philadelphia this morning, we discuss marijuana and pregnancy. Studies show more women are using marijuana right after they get pregnant. Dr. Mike joined Good Day this morning to discuss.
Well, according to new research, more and more American women are using marijuana just before and right after they become pregnant. But are there any risks that come with this?
Also, my favorite topic, crying may actually be good for your health. So let's bring in the doc. Good morning to you, Doc.
Hello.
Let's tackle the first one, marijuana and pregnancy. Before and after, what's going on here?
Bad idea. And many, many women are doing this. The statistics are frightening. Up to about 2% of women that are pregnant are using marijuana early on in the pregnancy. And the problem with this is we don't know. We have no idea whether this is good or bad. I can tell you for a fact, in looking at the literature myself, brain development can be affected by cannabis, by marijuana. And so I would say, forget about it. Don't do it. And we're going to study it because it's becoming more and more popular. But I would say, forget it. If you're trying to get pregnant, thinking of getting pregnant, or definitely if you are pregnant, don't do any kind of marijuana.
But doesn't the smoking also have an effect on the lungs?
Well, it does, but that's the least of my concerns. I'm concerned about the baby, the fetus, and their brain, the developing brain. And it's been shown that cannabis can have significant negative effects. It's all up in the air right now, but I wouldn't be part of the experiment.
Okay, and then we will make sure to take note of that. But what about crying? Because we've been, Thomas and I have been talking about how much we cry today on the show. But it's good for you, just letting it all out.
It is. Now, they did a very interesting study. Oh,
Yes,
I asked Samantha to play this. I go,
you would
cry too if it happened to you.
What happened? But anyway, I can't sing. No, the show ratings will go way down.
But you
My
can
daughter
make,
can sing,
make us
not me.
cry, though.
Yeah,
That'll be
well,
good for
that's
us.
true.
Can we get to the story? So the bottom line is,
Wow.
all right,
Ouch.
well,
God.
no, I
And
only
our
get a minute
time
and a
is
half.
up.
I'm trying to talk. Anyway, so the bottom line is this.
You all right there, Thomas?
I love you. Don't cry.
Now he's crying.
If what they did was they took people and they had them watch emotional movies where they were crying, and people that didn't watch emotional movies, and then they put their hands in cold water. And they found the people who had cried had less of an increase in heart rate. So the idea is they were able to handle stress better. So crying...
Or maybe they don't mind the cold. Like, who
You're
sticks
never
their
gonna
hands
come
in
back,
cold
right?
water? Like,
No. What it did was it reduced their stress, their cortisol, their catecholamines, and crying was such an emotional release that it was so important. Now, do you cry?
Every time I leave your office, I cry.
You cry, right?
Yeah,
well, I
he's,
do
he's
too.
just like this in the office. He's like, I have a minute and a half to get undressed. And I'm just, the pressure is...
Well, what movies do you watch that make you cry? What movies?
You know, I can't watch Charlotte's Web.
oh
When
my
that little
God.
spider dies.
What? You're spoiling it for the people.
If you haven't seen Charlotte's Web by now, the movie's like 30 years old. But...
I watch Top Gun. I cry when Goose gets killed.
Another
Degressing
spoiler.
having an F-14.
You're so
But remember, the one thing, folks, there is no crying in baseball.
No, all I can
No,
think
But
about,
if it makes me feel
in
better, I'll find a
baseball.
way to put it in.
Right?
Yeah.
all I can think about is that spider now, Wilbur.
Yeah.
Wilbur was the pig.
But it's okay.
Well, where's the pig? Oh, it's Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte's the spider.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've read that book.
You know, but it's
I'll see you in the office, doctor.
it's okay to cry.
Is it? Thank
It's
you.
okay.
Right here.
I love you. Come here.
Oh, I'm glad you guys
I
made
love
it.
you
Ooh,
too.
look what they're playing for you.
And more on Good Day this morning. A local grandfather is driving joy into the lives of sick children. That grandfather joined Good Day this morning to show off his custom creations.
Coming up at 8:16, a retired pop-pop battles back from a stroke and finds a new calling, customizing cars and bikes for children with cancer. Fox 29 was with this pop-pop, as he's called, when he surprised a boy in Sewell, New Jersey.
Is there Max here? Is there Max the Brave library? I got a delivery and I put it, I don't even know where it is. I brought it here yesterday, just in case. Should we go find it? Can we go find it? There it is.
So he was shy until he saw the bike. Eventually hopped on his new Jurassic Park bike and drove right through the living room.
But the smiles, the excitement is really happening for so many kids thanks to Rich Nardiello of Pop Pop's Custom Cars. And you've agreed to come in. You're showing us with your latest creations here.
Good morning.
Absolutely. Good morning, folks.
It's good to see you.
Thank you very much.
So this is an example of what you do. So these are the cars that kids love already, but you kind of specialize them?
Correct. They're little Tykes cozy coupes that most people have grown up on. They've made about 9.5 million so far. Everybody doesn't know what to do with them after their children grow up. So I started making them for children because I can have the power to make us smile. That's really what it's all about. I found out that with my own grandson, I made an Eagles car, of course, being a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And I saw the power of a smile for the most part for a minute. Didn't think of anything else. And I had a person that I knew, an adult, come down with pediatric cancer. And we started talking. I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe I can make one for that child that she was speaking of all the time. And the first one, Ariana, was in the hospital for 409 days, and she loved Minnie Mouse. So let's make one. Let's see what happens. Let's not have her think about spinal taps and infusion and IV pumps and that kind of stuff over and over and over. So I gave her that, and I saw the grandparents smile. I saw the parents smile. It was like a drug. It was basically a drug. I said, we're not going to stop.
They get a chance to forget about everything that they're going through, changing these children. You've created about 20 of these in your basement, all by hand.
And I'm still married.
And you're still married, Connie, right? Because she's like, yeah.
Exactly. I've also done raffles and things like that for a very special person in this world, Sharon Snyder of the Kisses for Kyle Foundation. I never take any type of monetary relief for anything.
So this is all out of pocket?
Yes. And I'm not a wealthy individual, let's just say, but it's all out of pocket because you have to feel pain a little bit before you get joy.
Can I talk real quick about your own journey? Because going back 6 years ago, we mentioned that you had suffered a stroke, unable to complete a sentence. A lot of people would just say, you know what, this is the road I'm going down. I throw up my hands, but that wasn't the case for you.
Scorpio, South Jersey, extrovert, type A, that wasn't going to happen. I had I had one grandchild at the time, and I'm completely motivated at the time. And I was surrounded by very motivated people right up the road at McGee Rehab. And to see people in the worst situations possible say, you know what, I'm just going to keep going for it, that was enabling for me. So they trained me to do a mud run, which is fascinating. I've did 4 of them since then. Because you have to have it internally as a motivating tool. So.
And speaking of motivation, wasn't also some of the stories about some people who were going through cancer, some of the kids and what they go through that inspired you to keep pushing?
No doubt. I mean, certain folks have had so many 28 spinal taps, 409 days in a hospital. As an adult, as a healthy adult, think of going to a bed and sitting in there for 409 days. That is incredible. So not only are the children, I call them little warriors, the moms are the strongest cadre of people that I have ever met. And Sharon Snyder of the Kisses for Kyle Foundation is a superhero. It is amazing to see someone who lost their child, and this one is in response to her. This is my first kindness card being sent over to CHOP today. Loses her child 20 years ago and devotes her entire life to helping children and their families, their siblings, their parents, on all different things, utilities, mattresses, the real things you don't think about, meal vouchers.
And you have photos of these children on...
They're all on my Facebook site, Pop Pop Custom Cars.
And this one's going to a little warrior this morning.
This one, no, this one is actually is going to be put, this one and this one are going to be put on the floor of CHOP, on the oncology floor. That's my kindness cars program.
So they'll all get to share it, the kids.
Correct. So if I can make a smile for one, I can make a smile for many.
That's true. So we hope to get some pictures later today because we want to see the smiles on the faces when the kids see this.
Absolutely.
And I also want to mention, because you mentioned how they motivated you, but you are also motivating others because you were still dealing with some of the effects from your stroke, correct?
Sure.
And you were doing all this with one arm, right?
Yep.
Wow. So how long does it take to create one?
It totally depends on what the child's caregiver says.
Right.
So, for instance, if someone says one of these, I've made close to a bunch of them. Could be a Mickey Mouse car, a Minnie Mouse car, a rubber ducky car, a Cookie Monster car.
You do all kinds.
Whatever they want. I have to figure it out. I'm analytical. I'm really not creative. I got to see in art.
And you also do bikes as well. If people want to get in contact with you, Pop Pop's Custom Cars, how do they do so?
My Facebook page has all my contact information. I mostly I can do a lot more with custom coupes because the bikes are kind of like a safety thing. I never want to compromise a child that's been compromised.
Right.
So make sure the tires are, everything's okay. It's more mechanical than certainly these things here too.
Well, it's wonderful what you're doing, and you're getting requests from out of the country and everything else, right?
I'm currently doing kindness cars in a program right now. I'm consulting 2 people in Australia, in Perth, Australia, who are going to be putting these things in the Perth Children's Hospital, one in Edmonton, Alberta. In Canada, I have a person there doing the same thing that I'm doing, but I guide them. That program I was kind of thinking about expanding in 2019, but excuse me, 2020.
Yeah.
And things go fast.
Keep up the amazing work. Do you create these for big kids?
Big kids like this.
Well, if you donate a lot, something to kindness for Kisses for Kyle, I'll be happy to make one for you.
Let's talk during the commercial break. I'll get my feet ready here.
Thank you, Pop-Up. We appreciate it. And we hope to see these all over the world.
Thank you very much.
Smiles
And more on Good Day this morning. You've heard of cake pops, but have you heard of cakesicles? Melanie Diamond Manlusuk, the chef and co-owner of Flow State Coffee Bar in Kensington, joined Good Day this morning to show us how they're made.
Melanie Diamond Manlusuk, the chef and co-owner of Flow State Coffee Bar in Kensington.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm really happy to be here.
Kind of like 4 different layers. I'm so excited.
So this is your creation. You just invented this?
Yes, yes. It was actually a plated dessert that I've condensed into one handy dandy package.
Okay.
How did this come about? You were just eating the dessert and different flavors, and you're like, oh, this would be good together?
When I was living in Italy, usually we wouldn't sit down for dessert, we would kind of walk around the piazza and grab something on the way. So I always like to try to make everything portable so that people can take it and kind of walk around the neighborhood.
Yeah, because we're always on the go. Now, normally, how long does this process take from start to finish to make one of these?
4 days.
4 days. That's made with a lot of love.
Yeah.
But the show's 4 hours, but not 4 days long. So you found a way to condense it and show us the different steps.
We're going to do it in 1 minute.
Okay, let's get to it then.
All right, so first we have the almond cake baked in here.
Okay.
And then if one of you wants to put the apricot jam, you can just kind of...
you see that right there? Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
So this is the first layer then.
Yep, spread it around.
Oh, you were so fancy.
It's like you're shading with a pencil.
There you go.
Okay.
And then after you have that, then you're going to grab your popsicle stick and you're going to put it on top.
This tray makes it really easy.
Yeah. So then here's the next step. So this is frozen now. We're going to add the gelato.
And what kind of gelato is this?
It's a crema Earl Grey tea gelato.
Oh, so you pop this in the freezer, what we
for a
just did
second.
here with the apricot and the cake. Okay.
Correct. And so now you can spread the gelato in
I'm going to
there.
spread it out here.
Yeah.
And this gelato takes a while to make as well.
It's a 3-day process. So 1 day of infusing the tea, the 2nd day of cooking the base, and then the 3rd day of spinning it, and then it's finally ready.
And it's an Earl Grey?
Earl Grey,
gelato?
Earl Grey from Chicago, one of the best Earl Grey teas in the world.
Ooh, okay.
This is actually the most expensive gelato we make. We don't sell it by the scoop because a small size is $5, and that's how much it costs us to make it.
Jeez. So if you want it, you have to have it in the cake.
You do have to have it in the cake.
Okay.
So now here we have the final one. We pop it out, and then it's time to dip. So if you want to go ahead.
So just go ahead and dip it in.
Yep, dip it in.
Ooh.
And then when you're done.
And this is just pure chocolate, or what do we have going here?
It's milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and toasted cocoa nibs, and it's melting. So you can just lay it.
Oh, I didn't get the back. Okay, let's see.
And then lay it down
There we
here.
go. Oh.
There you go.
Oh. It's dripping.
It is dripping. And then last.
Oh, no, it's sliding off. He's about to lose it.
No.
Oh, no! Oh, come on!
Oh, sorry. I guess this one will be mine.
I think so.
It's okay. I've had 10 years of practice.
And then drop it on the sheet.
Yeah.
Carol, but you need room?
Yeah. So
You
then,
put a little coconut on it?
and then you can put, and then this is the finished product. You can.
This
eat
is when the
those.
professionals, how they do it. Okay.
And
now
then
this
so
is
go
your
ahead
creation.
and grab
And
it.
this is gold foil?
24 karat gold leaf.
Ooh, so how much does this cost if we're going to get it from you at Flow State?
It's $10.
$10. Okay.
I'm going to have an expensive
And
belly.
we call it elegance on a stick. If you want to be super fancy, you can eat it with your pinky up.
Oh, here we go.
So good.
It is good. So many flavors at once. I like it.
Permanent item on the menu?
Through summer at least.
Oh, through summer.
And it's like having high tea all on a stick.
That's true. It was really good.
Eat
Tell me
it
you got a little
quickly.
something.
Eat it quickly.
Got a little something right here. We like it. We like it. But you have all kinds of cool treats at your place.
Yeah, all kinds of pastry, 6 different kinds of gelati every day, coffee drinks, tea drinks. We have lunch, we have breakfast.
And you said you've been there for about a year?
Yes.
And you're going to celebrate with?
With a gelato eating contest.
Oh, that's going to be fun.
Yeah, so you have to eat an entire pint of gelato the fastest.
Wow.
Last year, our winner did it in 2.5 minutes.
Ooh, okay. So what's your Instagram?
2.5 minutes? That's a long time.
He's trying to get in the competition.
We have to sign you up for the competition. You're already talking smack.
Yep, he is.
Bring it.
So where specifically are you guys located in Kensington?
2413 Frankfurt Avenue, right at the corner of Frankfurt and York.
Okay, and your Instagram is Flow State Philly, right?
Yes.
Flow State Philly. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Melanie.
thank
We're
you
loving
for
it.
having me.
We're going to keep eating this.
Right.
But look away.
And we are going to look away to Washington now, where FBI Director Christopher Wray's appearance before a Senate committee could be something of a preview of the questioning Special Counsel Robert Mueller is going to face in Congress tomorrow. Stay with us.
Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Question: did the FBI assess the impact of Manafort providing this specific and significant campaign information to Russian intelligence?
Well, Senator, there was an awful amount of work done by a huge team of professionals that resulted in a 450-something page report. And I really want to be careful not to be trying to add my own gloss or layering on top of that, especially with Special Counsel Mueller testifying tomorrow. So I'm going to leave it at that for now.
All right, and I would ask for a confidential briefing then on this subject. And you can say yes or no, but I will request it. Did the FBI determine whether any of this information ended up in the hands of the IRA?
There's really nothing I can say on that subject here, Senator.
Okay. All right. My time is almost up. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, Mr. Wray. Tell me what the biggest change you've experienced has been since you've taken your current position.
Well, I appreciate the fact that increasingly I find, as I've made my way from one corner of the country to another, visiting all the field offices, meeting with law enforcement in every state, community partners in every state, private sector partners in every state, that increasingly out in the rest of America, people are recognizing that the FBI has had more than 2 investigations over the last few years.
Right. In May, Attorney General Barr noted that to the extent there was overreach in connection with the 2016 election, it seems to have been a few people at the top getting it into their heads that they know better than the American people. We know what happened in part because we've seen text messages between FBI investigators that show a strong bias against then-candidate Donald Trump. These texts suggest that the agents saw the purpose of their investigation as being very specific. That is, to stop Donald Trump from becoming president of the United States. Given the FBI's immense investigative power, these reports are, I'm sure you would agree, troubling. And it's been an ongoing concern that the Bureau's history has been one that has involved a deliberate and, through most of its history, I think, a successful effort to make sure that its reputation precedes it and to make sure that it stays out of politics and that it sticks to down-the-line law enforcement. I understand you've made some personnel changes in response to what happened in 2016. Tell me what else you're doing, and are there internal practices and procedures that you can change or implement to make sure that the FBI uses its power appropriately and to make sure that things like this don't happen?
Thank you, Senator. I welcome the question. I would say a couple of things. First, one of the primary messages I have tried to impart to every single FBI audience everywhere I go is that our reputation as an agency, I think, revolves less around our wins and victories and successes over 111 years and more on the way in which we've accomplished those wins. And when we've made mistakes, and over 111 years we've made our share of mistakes, the key is whether we learn from them. But we need to be in a position with every investigation, every intelligence analysis, that we can say when we get criticized or when somebody's not happy with the result of it, and there's always somebody who's not happy, we need to be able to say, hey, I get it. You may not like where it ended up, but you can't really challenge the integrity and objectivity and professionalism of how we got there. So as you say, I've made personnel changes, turned over essentially the entire leadership team. Second, we put in place a number of new policies. Third, I did a full day of training for starting at the top on the theory that a tone starts at the top. So I brought all of the SES workforce across the entire FBI around the world for a day at Quantico. And we had the Inspector General's office, we had judges, we had people like that trying to remind everybody that it's not just objectivity in what we do, but the appearance of objectivity in what we do that's so important. I will say that while we've certainly, as I said, had mistakes and we've taken appropriate disciplinary action when that has occurred, that my experience with the FBI, and I say that I think with a pretty informed basis for it now, is that it is full, top to bottom, of hardworking professionals of the highest integrity, incredible commitment to service over self, and I'm proud every day to work with them.
Thank you. Does the FBI or the administration as a whole have a position on the reauthorization of the expiring authorities under the USA Freedom Act?
I don't think the administration has taken an official position, although, as I said to Chairman Graham, there are three provisions in particular that are keenly relevant to the FBI that, at least my experience has been, are relatively non-controversial, extremely important to our work, and all subject to court supervision. Those are the business records provision that we talked about, the roving wiretap provision, which is essentially equivalent to what already exists under Title III on the criminal side, and the lone wolf provision, which, although it has not been used yet, that is really more because we've chosen to try to use other tools where we can, and the way the counterterrorism threat is evolving, we predict that over the next few years, the lone wolf provision will become more and more important, so we would hate to see it disappear.
The collection of call detail records, or CDRs, is authorized by Section 215 of the Patriot Act and is subsequently modified by the USA Freedom Act, has been the subject of a fair amount of scrutiny after it was reported recently that, or after the NSA rather publicly reported that in June of 2018 it was deleting 3 years worth of CDR records due to what they referred to as technical irregularities in the data provided to the NSA from the telecommunications providers, leading to the receipt of certain CDRs that NSA, quote, was not authorized to receive. In March of this year, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal both reported that the NSA had shut down the entire CDR collection program in 2018 and was considering ending the program entirely. What's the current status of the CDR program?
Well, Senator, as you alluded to in your question, that's really an NSA authority, and I would really defer to them for the kind of the latest and greatest on that.
Don't you think the abuse of that or the impropriety of its collection has to be something that we take into account in deciding whether or in what way to reauthorize these programs?
Well, certainly I think the Congress should make a thoughtful decision about reauthorization of any of the provisions in the USA Freedom Act. And I think questions of errors or irregularities or even abuses are appropriate for the Congress to take into account. But the specifics about the CDR program, I'm really going to defer to NSA on. Okay. The three provisions I listed off are the ones that the FBI is most focused on.
Thank you.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ray, welcome. I'd like to ask you a question. Do you know what group was responsible for more homicides from 2000 to 2016 more than any other domestic extremist group?
Not sure, but I trust you're about to tell me.
Not a trick question. I raised that question because your testimony that was submitted to the committee talked a lot about homegrown violent extremists. In an unclassified FBI DHS Joint Intelligence Bulletin in May 2017 found that white supremacist extremism poses a persistent threat of lethal violence. Went on to say that white supremacists were responsible for more homicides from 2000 to 2016 than any other domestic extremist movement. 7 members of the committee joined me in writing a letter to you and Attorney General Barr explaining our concern about whether the FBI and Department of Justice were taking adequate measures to combat white supremacist violence and minimizing this growing domestic terrorism threat. The term white supremacist, white nationalist is not included in your statement to the committee when you talk about threats to America. There is a reference to racism, which I think probably was meant to include that, but nothing more specific. We live in a world where the neo-Nazis and white supremacists are taking lives in many places. A white supremacist murdered 51 Muslim worshippers in New Zealand. 2017, a white supremacist murdered 6 Muslim worshippers at a mosque in Quebec City, Canada. And in the United States, far-right extremists perpetrated the shootings at the Sikh Temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the Shabbat of Poway, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Poway Synagogue in Poway, California. The reason I raise this is because there is a concern that this is not being taken as seriously as it should be, as one of the real threats in our country. And a concern as well that the FBI has now changed its definition when it comes to race-related crimes. They've created a new category for what you term racially motivated violent extremism. It used to be white supremacist incidents. Could you explain to me why there was this change, whether you consider this a serious threat, and what you're doing about it? I ask you this in the context of a national conversation that's taking place every single day under this presidency about the issue of race and incitements to emotion and violence by the people who are using race as the motivator.
So, Senator, first, let me sort of unpack your question a little bit. Needless to say, we take domestic terrorism or hate crime, regardless of ideology, extremely seriously, I can assure you. And we are aggressively pursuing it, using both counterterrorism resources and criminal investigative resources, and partnering closely with our state and local partners. In just the last little while, we've had cases involving, for example, the Coast Guard lieutenant who was planning an attack on elected officials and TV anchors here in this area. We've had militia members.
Was that motivated by a white supremacy belief?
I think it would be a version of that, certainly. Our focus, when you asked about the categorization, our focus is on the violence. We, the FBI, don't investigate ideology no matter how repugnant. We investigate violence. And any extremist ideology, when it turns to violence, we're all over it. And we've had, in fact, and that you don't have to just take my word for it, just in the first 3 quarters of this year, we've had more domestic terrorism arrests than the prior year, and it's about the same number of arrests as we have on the international terrorism side.
I ask you to clarify that, because when you talk, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, but when you talk about homegrown violent extremists, and I talk about domestic violent extremists, are we talking about the same thing?
No. So we use the term homegrown violent extremism to refer to people already here in the United States who are inspired by different parts of the global jihadist movement to commit terrorist acts.
Okay,
we use the term domestic terrorism to refer to a broader array of threats ranging from anarchist extremism to different kinds of racially motivated violent extremism to different kinds of environmental extremism, etc.
So let me pursue that for a second. So the point I'm getting to, and the reason I quoted this unclassified report, is if it's violence that motivates the FBI investigation. What we have here is a statement in this unclassified joint intelligence report that between the years 2000 and 2016, the white supremacists were responsible for more homicides than any other domestic extremism movement. Now, I see the distinction you're making, homegrown versus domestic. But let me ask you, can you quantify either one of them for us?
Well, in terms of number of arrests, we have, through the third quarter of this fiscal year, had about, give or take, 100 arrests in the international terrorism side, which includes the homegrown violent extremism.
This year?
This year. But we've also had just about the same number, again, don't quote me to the exact digit, on the domestic terrorism side. And I will say that a majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence, but it includes other things as well.
I think this is significant. I do not want to diminish the work that you're doing when it comes to the homegrown domestic terrorism in any way whatsoever, not at all. And I understand that as a serious threat to the United States, and 9/11 is proof positive of that fact. But what you have just said is significant. If the number of people arrested this calendar year, when it comes to this extremist conduct, is about equal between those who were inspired by foreign actors, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, whatever it might be, and those who were inspired by white supremacy or at least some version of race. Now, if that's the way I heard you say it, please clarify.
So let me clarify. What I just gave you were the number of arrests. The number of arrests. That's not necessarily the same thing as the number of investigations.
Well,
right? So that's an important distinction.
Assuming the integrity of your department, which I will, the fact that they would make an arrest, it is with the belief that a crime has been committed. The point I'm getting to is we are in a very tense moment in American history on the issue of race. We are having a national conversation that we haven't had in a long time about racism and the reaction, what's acceptable and what is not. And what I'm asking you from the FBI point of view, and what you've told me, is that we ought to take care, as seriously as we take foreign-inspired terrorism, there is a domestic terrorism underway in the name of race that is as threatening in some respects as the foreign terrorism. That's the way I hear it.
Yeah, I don't know that I think the greatest terrorist threat to the homeland is the homegrown violent extremist. I will say that we take domestic,
foreign-inspired,
which is jihadist-inspired violence. That does not mean, by any stretch of the imagination, that we don't take domestic terrorism, including hate crime committed on behalf of some kind of white supremacist ideology, extremely seriously. And we have had a number of very significant arrests. I mentioned the Coast Guard one, but we had militia members in Cleveland stockpiling explosives to build pipe bombs. We had the Cesar Sayoc case involving the package IED. We had the Rise Above movement, where we arrested 8 different people on federal rioting charges. One of them fled to El Salvador, and we got him back. We had the Tree of Life synagogue shooting case, which you mentioned, and the shooting outside San Diego, the attack in the synagogue there. We got 29 count, I think it was, conviction and life sentence related to the Charlottesville matter. So make no mistake, the FBI, working with our state and local law enforcement partners, is all over this.
Thank you very much.
Senator Cornyn.
Director Wray, thank you for opening your remarks with your tribute to local, state, and federal law enforcement officers. It's really important for all of us, not just the professional law enforcement officers you represent, but to the entire nation, to acknowledge and honor these heroes for their service and sacrifice. So thank you for that. You may be interested to know that it's this Friday it'll be my honor to deliver the Congressional Badge of Bravery to a group of Houston FBI agents for their work during Hurricane Harvey, which was a particularly significant event in my state. And so on their behalf, let me thank you and all of the rank and file FBI agents that do such a great job every day. You'll recall that on November the 5th, 2017, Devin Patrick Kelly killed 26 worshipers at a little Baptist church outside of San Antonio in Sutherland Springs. He injured 20 more people, devastating that community, as we could imagine. We found out that Mr. Kelly was a convicted felon. He had a record of being detained for mental health reasons. He had been convicted of domestic violence, actually even fracturing his stepson's skull during one particular episode. He should never have been able to purchase firearms through a licensed firearm dealer because he should have failed the background check. But he did what we find is unfortunately not entirely uncommon. He lied, and then he bought these weapons he used to commit this terrible, tragic event. So Congress passed a piece of legislation, as you know, called Fix NICS, Fix the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, to try to encourage federal agencies to provide records of people who are already legally disqualified under current law. And of course, as you know, that background check system is maintained by the FBI. Could you give us a update on what the impact has been, just in general terms?
Well, certainly, Senator, I agree with you that the NICS system only works at its best when we have complete information that ensures the goal we all share of making sure that people who are legally prohibited from possessing firearms don't get their hands on them. Last year, I think the FBI's NICS system had, I think, 100,000 plus or thereabouts denials. And certainly we're seeing progress in terms of the agencies that had not supplied records, starting to do that. I don't have the exact, percentage of how far along we are, but we're certainly making progress, and we appreciate your leadership in ensuring that we move in that direction.
Would you agree with me that in all probability, Congress's response to that terrible tragedy in Sutherland Springs by reforming the Fix NICS, the background check system, has probably saved lives?
I do think so.
Director Wray, I was in Austin, Texas with Senator Warner and Senator Burr, who are the chair and vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, at a program hosted by TechNet for the technology community there in Austin, which is, as you know, robust and growing. Bill Priestap, who at the time was head of the counterintelligence division at the FBI, made a presentation, particularly about the China threat. And I think it was an eye-opening presentation for a lot of the folks who were there. One I remember in particular said he thought that once the United States issued a visa to somebody, that they had performed a security background check on that person and they were not a threat to the United States national security. Mr. Priestap made the point that in the old days it was spy versus spy, but now it's spy versus a whole host of unconventional and informal collectors. I know the FBI has done its best to try to spread that word, but can you tell me sort of what your record has been in doing that and whether you think that there's more that needs to be done by Congress? Or I know the FBI's got its hands full. It can't necessarily go around and make presentations like this all across the country while you're trying to keep the bad guys off the streets. But is there more that we need to do to supplement the efforts of the FBI to educate the American people on this threat?
Well, I will say when it comes to Congress's role, I have, despite the bitterly polarized political environment that we all live in right now, I've actually been heartened by, on this particular issue, every time I appear in front of a committee of Congress, from one end of the spectrum to the other, compared to earlier stages in my career in law enforcement, the level of alignment and consensus about the importance of confronting this threat in a more thoughtful and effective way, I think is source for cheer. And so the more Congress can raise awareness, I think the more we can appropriately protect the country. I will say that there's a lot that people, I think, in this country don't understand about the nature of the China threat. It is not just, as you say, spy versus spy, traditional intelligence operatives. There are a slew of what we call non-traditional collectors, businessmen, scientists, high-level academics, graduate students, et cetera, people who are not intelligence officers by profession, but who are, for a variety of reasons, working on behalf of the Chinese government. And I think sometimes people don't understand the degree to which lines that we all revere and cherish in this country are blurred, if not entirely eliminated, in China. The difference between the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, not really a difference. The difference between the Chinese government and its private sector is not really a difference. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because under Chinese law, most companies in China are either already literally state-owned enterprises, so essentially just an arm of the state for that reason, or legally or practically beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. Different aspects of Chinese law require those companies to basically provide whatever information the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party wants, essentially upon demand. And I think a lot of people don't understand this fact. Virtually any company from China of any size is required to have inside it a Chinese Communist Party cell or committee to ensure that the company adheres to Chinese Communist Party policies. So when those folks are out trying to, through legitimate means or illegitimate means, steal intellectual property, that's what we're talking about. It's a counterintelligence threat. And we have, in the last several months, had a whole variety of cases. Hackers associated with the Chinese MSS who were engaged in an extensive campaign of intrusions against something like 45 different companies, 12 different states, lots of countries. We had an MSS officer who's been charged in Ohio, who's been trying to steal aviation secrets from companies there. Different Chinese MSS officers, an entire team of hackers that were involved in a 5-year campaign of repeated intrusions. We had a Chinese state-owned enterprise, which, along with a couple of individuals, was trying to steal trade secrets from a company in Idaho. We had a guy in Chicago, Senator Durbin, who was working with the MSS to recruit employees of cleared defense contractors. We had a guy in Oklahoma who was stealing over $1 billion of confidential proprietary information from a U.S. energy company. We had, of course, and I haven't gotten to the Huawei case, where they were charged literally from coast to coast with a campaign of fraud, intellectual property theft, and obstruction of justice. And I could go on and on and on. It affects basically every industry in this country, and agriculture. It affects the private sector. It affects academia. It involves human operations. It involves cyber operations. To be clear, we welcome competition. We welcome academic freedom, but cheating, not okay. Fraud, not okay. Cyber hacking, not okay. And as long as they keep committing crimes and threatening our national security, they're going to keep encountering the FBI.
Thank you.
Other than that, are we in a pretty good shape with China? It's in our White House.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Wray. I'd like to take you back to the FBI's role in the Kavanaugh background investigation, if I may. There were 2 letters that were sent to you by law firms in that time frame. One pointed out that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I'm quoting the letter here, declined to interview witnesses whose names we provided to the FBI as possessing information highly relevant to the allegations. And the other referenced agents meeting with a witness whose counsel then, quote, provided the FBI with a list of more than 20 additional witnesses likely to have relevant information. And that letter actually attached an affidavit from a very apparently credible person who had been at college at the time, was currently an emergency room physician, and so forth. And evidently there was no follow-up on that. either. I'd like to ask those 2 letters to be made a part of the record. We also experienced on this committee considerable difficulty in finding out where the point of entry would be to the FBI for information. I've been a U.S. attorney. I work closely with the FBI as Rhode Island's Attorney General. I have never known the FBI to be fending off information before. So this was a very novel and peculiar circumstance in which witnesses weren't being interviewed and in which, when we asked to find out where the point of entry was for information, there was none, apparently. You were asked to provide committee confidential contact information for an FBI agent to whom members can send credible contacts regarding individuals seeking to be interviewed. Did that ever happen?
Well, Senator, I don't remember all the specifics of that particular background investigation, but what I will say, you referenced your prior experience as U.S. Attorney, and of course we've talked about that before. I think it's important for people to understand that there's a fundamental difference between a background investigation and the kinds of criminal investigations or even counterintelligence investigations the FBI does every day.
Yes,
a background investigation is something that we do in a completely different way as an investigative service provider to a client agency. In this case, it would have been the White House. And I, having
as you testified to Senator Harris in the Homeland Security Committee, our supplemental update to the previous background investigation was limited in scope, and it was limited in scope by the White House. That's correct?
I also testified, I did testify to that, and I stand by that testimony. I would also say, though, as I recall, I also testified that I consulted at length with our security professionals who are specialists in background investigations to make sure that that investigation, that background investigation, was done consistent with our longstanding policies, practices, and procedures for background investigations, where the scope, it's not unusual for the scope to be limited.
So here's my hypothesis. You don't recall whether you responded to this letter by seeing to it that there was an FBI agent to whom members could send credible contacts. I don't believe there was, because I was trying to vector information to the right place, and every door we turned to closed or said, no, go to that door, and then that door closed or said, no, go to that door. The ultimate upshot, it seemed to me, was that the FBI established a tip line. And if people wanted to bring in information, they were told to call into the tip line. Now, I've tried to find out what the protocol is for dealing with tip lines. And I would ask that, as a question for the record, you provide me whatever is relevant to the standard operating procedure and practice for the FBI with respect to the treatment of tip line information when it comes in. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd be happy to provide you more information about tip lines.
Thank you. What I did find was an FBI video that describes how tip lines work when it comes in through the FBI's FBI.gov interface. The first step, it says, is that it comes into the Public Access Center unit at FBI headquarters. Analysts will vet them. They'll review them for believability, credibility, check internal databases and external databases to verify the information is a valid tip. Can you vouch that those steps were undertaken with respect to the Kavanaugh background investigation tip line?
What I can tell you, Senator, is that I spoke specifically with the people responsible for the background investigation, who are career professionals specializing in background investigations, not to be confused with criminal investigations or counterintelligence investigations. And I was assured repeatedly that they felt comfortable that the way it was being handled was consistent with our practices, procedures, and longstanding approach.
There hadn't been a tip line before in a background investigation ever, had there?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I don't think there was, so it's hard to say that it's consistent with procedures. Here's what the procedures apparently are. Another one is every single tip is looked at by at least 2 individuals who have independent quality assurance checks. Do you know if that procedure was followed with respect to the Kavanaugh investigation tip line?
Well, Senator, I would again come back to the answer I gave, which is I expect that background investigations, which are different fundamentally different from criminal investigations and counterintelligence investigations.
But you don't
were
know.
being conducted in a way that the professionals who specialize in this area felt comfortable.
But you don't know whether or not the tip line procedures were followed.
I'm not familiar. I don't have the document in front of me that you're looking at. I haven't talked specifically about that. So
then it says, once a tip is determined to have further investigative merit, a supervisor would actually review the tip, and at that point, it gets vectored into electronic systems for further processing. And I guess if you're not familiar with whether that supervisory step took place either.
What I am familiar with is the assurances I've received.
I got it. Yeah, no, I heard that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to ask something more specific. And the last is every single piece of information that's submitted by an individual is reviewed by FBI personnel at FBI headquarters. And again, you can't vouch for that having taken place with respect to this tip line.
I can't speak to that specifically.
Got it. Okay. You know, here's my concern, and I'll be perfectly candid about it, and you can answer however you want in questions for the record to allay my concerns. But it looked to me like every time somebody went to try to get an FBI agent to take information, they got fended off, and that the tip line actually became a tip dump into which information was dumped and never, ever reviewed for credibility and was not treated with the protocol that the FBI has announced that it usually handles with tip lines. So I'm happy to continue this conversation. My time is up right now, but please, I think that's a legitimate question to ask, and I hope that in answers for the record, you'll be able to compare the protocols that the FBI uses for tip lines with the way in which this particular tip line was handled by the FBI. And I do understand that you treat these differently and that they don't follow ordinary procedure. But ordinary procedure is a fairly reasonable benchmark, and I'm interested in finding out how close the FBI came to it in this particular tip line.
Well, I'd be happy to see if we can provide you more information as follow-up to your questions. Again, I would say that ordinary procedure, to use your phrase, there's ordinary procedure for criminal investigations and counterintelligence investigations. Ordinary procedure for background investigations is something different, in my view.
Couldn't agree with you more, and once we agree on what the facts are of what took place, we can have a discussion about whether or not that met standards of kind of basic responsibility. Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Sass.
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us again tomorrow, same time, same place, 10 a.m., and follow us at fox29.com as well as our mobile app for the latest breaking news, in addition to our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thank you for joining us.